editions of Consciousness radio program on the Community Listening Network. I'm your host, Keith David Henry, and we are in a series that I've called the Avatar, sort of after the fact. It was kind of an impromptu series. I didn't mean to have this series, but what we've been talking about in this series is, the part of us, this flesh and blood, and the ego and the thought, and whatever that spiritual connection, that spiritual feeling. This is the avatar that we've come to this place with, a representative of Source in this realm. And I have a special guest with me today. I'll be interviewing my brother, Kent Douglas Henry, who is president of a nonprofit organization. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to let him introduce himself and explain who he is and what he does. Welcome to the program, Kent.
Thank you, Keith. I am president and chairman of an organization that provides transitional housing and mentoring for men who have graduated from a long-term drug rehab. Our main staple is mentoring. I guess in the last year or so, we started providing the transitional housing because of the realization of the need of some kind of interim support between coming out of a rehab and kind of joining society, or rejoining society, as to say.
I understand there is a great need for that. That doesn't seem to be, from what I can tell, there doesn't seem to be a lot of this type of resource around. Am I wrong about that?
No, in fact, when we were doing our research, we weren't aware of any programs that operate the way we operate. There are halfway houses, which are very hands-off, and there's limited case management, but what we're doing here is something very different and very new. We provide mentoring individually to the men, but for the most part, it's in a home setting. It's not a institutionalized setting. The first of what we hope will be many houses. So these men live in this house, cable, internet, there's no curfew or anything. They're mentored, but they're pretty much on their own, and the goal is to allow them to empower themselves, and we are more guides and facilitators, more so than bosses or anything like that, which is generally when you get into addictions, and they have these sponsors. They call them sponsors, and the general gist of the sponsor is, I'm the sponsor, I've been there, you do what I say, and you do it this way. And we have taken a different approach. While we will give our experience and what has worked for us, we realize that every individual is different, and a different thing is going to work for them.
I understand. Okay. Now, one of the interesting things that I found, thank you, by the way, for sending me the information on the big book from Alcoholics Anonymous. And I read through the first 71 pages of that book, and as I was reading through it, I was just overwhelmed with the spiritual power of what was said in those first 71 pages, and it was extremely clear to me how a program like AA could be so effective. And the people that put together this program in the big book at one point, what kind of success rate were they having?
Well, in the very beginning, first of all, Alcoholics Anonymous was formed around 1939, and when they were formed, if you read the original Alcoholics Anonymous text, the discussion was not just about alcohol, but the discussion was about alcohol and drugs and narcotics. That was the discussion that was put forth in the book. I guess, as I said, it was sometime around 1939. I'm sorry, I lost the second part of the question.
Well, that was good information. The actual question was what percentage of success were they having based on this big book?
Thank you. I'm sorry. Yeah, the percentage was around 50 to 100% for those who genuinely were interested in recovery.
Excellent, excellent. Now, today's success rate for AA members, if I'm not mistaken, I've read statistics that say it's as low as 3%. And I was wondering if you might explain why the success rate seems to be so low when the founders seem to have such great success with the program.
Well, in my opinion, the success rate is so low because the principles that were put forth have been, to some degree, perverted. And for example, one of the main staples of Alcoholics Anonymous is anonymity. If you or anyone were to go to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, when someone speaks, the first thing they say is, "My name is such and such, and I am an alcoholic." And right from the beginning, they've gone off track because, number one, while the original text does call for an individual to accept a condition, it does not call for a person to identify themselves as an alcoholic. Not only that, but it doesn't even call for an individual to identify themselves. In fact, if you read the text in the meetings, what's supposed to be said is, "Hello, I am a member of Alcoholics Anonymous." You're not supposed to say a name, and you are not supposed to identify yourself as an alcoholic. So that's one of the things. One of the other things, which you will probably get into a little bit deeper later, is how this whole ideal of the higher power. In the text, it talks about identifying a higher power. And you can go into any one of the rooms, that is the Alcoholics Anonymous rooms where they have the meetings, or even any social event where there are people who are members of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the whole ideal is, well, look, once you're an addict, you're always an addict, and that's just not what the big book puts forth. And as far as a higher power, it could be anything greater than yourself, and part of the issue is what they have done is made the group the higher power. And as you read later on in the text, the book says specifically that it is God, that it is, in fact, it even mentions Christ as being the higher power. And one of the, I mean, I'm sure there's some differences in the listening audience as to who or what God is, but one of the main things that the big book does say is that it is God. And in fact, I'm going to paraphrase because I don't remember the exact words, but paraphrasing, there's a paragraph right in the first 71 pages that says that your recovery, your condition does not depend on any person, including yourself, but it depends only on your relationship with God. And the book seeks to, though it starts off saying higher power, it seeks to get you to understand that the power that is going to free you, that is going to make you healed, that is going to cure you, that is going to eliminate, remove this addiction is God. The addiction will no longer be there. You will no longer be addicted. You will be healed. This is what the big book says. There is no sentiment in the big book that you will always be an addict. It is nowhere in the big book. In fact, it is the exact opposite. And these are some of the reasons why I believe the program has such a low success rate at this point.
Well, just having read through that section, it was just very well written, and I found it interesting that the term that was constantly used was a power greater than yourself, and it became very clear that and anybody that is going to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting has obviously come to the point where they realize they cannot control this substance. They want to stop, but they can't. And the interesting thing that I found in this section was that once it kept talking about power greater than yourself, and that power greater than yourself is the only power capable of breaking that. You can't do it by yourself. And I've heard people talking about the higher power, that it could be a rock or a chair or something like that. And none of this stuff is in the big book. This seems to be dogma that is generated in the meetings, and I was extremely surprised to find out that in AA meetings it is uncommon for people to read the big book. Can you expound on that?
Well, I have found it uncommon. There are several texts that Alcoholics Anonymous uses. There's a big book, there's 12 by 12, and several others. But what I have found in my personal experience in dealing with people in Alcoholics Anonymous is that very few actually refer to the text. Very few refer to the text. They are mainly referring to what is being said in the rooms. They're mainly going with the traditions that have been set rather than the actual principles that were stated in the text. And to a degree, what has been done to it is, and it has been turned into a religion instead of a spiritual tool, which is what it was originally intended to be. In fact, you can go into any Alcoholics Anonymous meeting and you'll hear any number of things that you probably wouldn't want your 10, 11, 12-year-old, maybe even your parents to hear some of these things that are said in these meetings. And if you read the original Big Book, that is not what those meetings were intended to be. They were not intended to be a dumping ground for someone to come in and get stuff off of their chest. That is the exact opposite of what they were intended for. The original intention of the meeting was a fellowship of encouragement that you could bring your children to, that you could bring the entire family to, and everyone would be celebrating this power, this higher power, which is God. I should say that initially what the Alcoholics Anonymous or the 12-step program was intended for was a evangelism tool to bring alcoholics and addicts, drug addicts, to the understanding of God, specifically to Christ. So the whole thing has gotten a little bit, well, not a little bit, the whole thing has gotten really very much off track. And as I said, I don't attend very many AA and NA meetings at all. The vice president of our group is a recovered addict. Our founder is a recovered addict. And you'll notice I didn't say in recovery. I myself am a recovered addict. And the one thing that the three of us have in common is that from that very time that we accepted the understanding that the power that the Big Book is talking about is God, not one of us have used it again. And that is what we're trying to perpetuate. That's what we're trying to uh, kind of mix in with our mentoring and with this whole housing program is that you don't have to be attached to this thing for life. You know, you don't have to be an addict the rest of your life and have to be treated. That's not what the Big Book says. That's not what I know. That's not what the Bible says. And I know that you're into some of the spiritual writings, and I'm sure none of them say anything about you being trapped and stuck in any condition. That there is a power that can remove this condition, and I'm sure that's across the board in all these spiritual writings, that there is a power that can literally remove these ailments from you, that can heal you, not that you're in a constant state of of sickness, but that you are healed.
I agree, and that's one of the reasons why I tend to harp on religion so much, because religion is one of those mechanisms that's designed to keep you coming back, keep you under their control, keep you, giving your money to them, and never being self-empowered, never reaching out beyond and reaching into your own creativity. But you almost become a slave of the system. And I mean, no one is doing it against their will, or so they think. It's just the human species has been so conditioned to obedience that I don't think that can be underestimated in this whole deal. But I'll tell you, I remember talking to you years ago after you'd come out of the program, and your demeanor and everything, and I wasn't surprised. It was more than surprised. I didn't know what to do with you, because you were in a category I'd never met before. Because most people that I'd seen that were quote unquote in recovery, there was always this sense of desperation. Oh, I'm clean another day, or I'm clean another month, and just hoping they don't fall off the wagon. Whereas with you, there was no sense of urgency. It was you had found healing. There was no nothing false about it. It was just a very natural and real thing. And I just find it interesting. How was it that you were able to pick up on the things like the Big Book while others weren't?
Well, it's the higher power. I'll explain what I mean by that a little bit more in detail. There was a gentleman who had come to the rehab that I was in, and I guess, first of all, I was in the rehab for 2 years, and maybe about a year and a half into the rehab, there was a gentleman that came from California who had done intensive studies on the Big Book, on its origin. I mean, this guy was a walking Big Book. And we had these sessions. He chose 12 of us, and we all had these sessions for about a week. It was about 10 to 12 hours a day. Needless to say, it was kind of exhausting, but I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where it was exhausting, but the information was so fresh and new and sustaining that even in your exhaustion, you couldn't get enough. But it was a setting like that, and we took the first 71 pages of the Big Book, which basically I have kind of come to the conclusion is the first 3 steps, if you really go through those first 71 pages. And we took those first 71 pages and read it. There's a scripture that talks about going over things line upon line, precept upon precept. And that's what we did. We had our 1939 dictionary, we had our modern day dictionary, and we had our first edition of the Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book. And we literally started at the beginning. I mean, from the inside of the cover, and read every single thing. And I had heard people talk about the Big Book, and I had skimmed through the Big Book, But he broke this thing down, and we started reading what it was saying, how it was talking about being recovered, how it was talking about Christ, and how it was talking about God, and how it was talking about having. Another thing you alluded to of the success rate, and how it talked about sponsorship, and how in today's Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous programs, each person is encouraged to go and get a sponsor. That's not what the Big Book says at all. What the Big Book says is those who have been healed are supposed to go and seek out those who are seeking healing and show them the way. So that's what this group is about. We have mentored each other. And it sounds like the total opposite, but it sounds like the total opposite would work. But we go on the principle of it is freedom. It is freedom that allows one to escape certain things. Not, and I know that sounds kind of weird to say that, but if someone tells you you must go to these meetings and you must do this and you must do that, that's not freedom. If someone tells you this is a free gift from God, you can be healed, now that's freedom. No strings, nothing attached to it, just here's healing. And that's what the Big Book says, and that's what we have grasped onto, and that's what I attribute the success that is being done in me to, is simply grace. That's the best word I can use.
Excellent, excellent. You know, as I was reading through those first 71 pages, my heart was breaking within me as I realized that you have millions and millions of alcoholics and addicts that are looking for help and have hit the bottom and are going to these AA programs and are not being helped. You know, and, you know, many of them, you know, I was reading an article where, you know, they're, you know, Alcoholics Anonymous, the suicide rate within Alcoholics Anonymous. So if you, as a listener, if you are an alcoholic, if you're struggling with it, or if you know people who are struggling with alcoholism, friends or family, the absolute best gift you could give to these people is the Big Book. Tell them to sit down and read the first 71 pages.
And please make sure it's the Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book.
Are there others?
Yes. Yes.
Why am I not surprised?
There is a Narcotics Anonymous Big Book. And Narcotics Anonymous was actually, I'd say, maybe about 10 years later on the scene. There were some organizations that were similar to Narcotics Anonymous that were on the scene prior to the Narcotics Anonymous that kind of faded and started up and faded. But I really found this very interesting. One of the reasons that Narcotics Anonymous formed was because there were people who were doing narcotics who were not allowed in the Alcoholics Anonymous meetings.
Well, we don't want that riffraff in.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That is so. You can tell. I can't even find the words. That just was so flabbergasting to me, especially as you look and you read the Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book. It doesn't just talk about alcohol. It also talks about narcotics. But if you were doing cocaine or stuck on something like that, you were not allowed in the closed Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. In fact, to this day, if you go to certain Alcoholics Anonymous meetings and mention narcotics, you'll get anything from a weird look or a side to, you know, a really mean look and literally threat of violence. It's amazing to me. I can't figure out where this is coming from, but to some degree, this thing, I mean, you've heard of the Crusades, and, you know, what has happened is instead of this tool serving man, now all of a sudden it's been flipped totally around, and man is now serving the tool, which is totally ridiculous to me. However, it's what you get, you know.
Seems to be the nature of man.
Yeah.
This is Keith David Henry on the Progressions of Consciousness radio program on the CLN network, and we're speaking with our very special guest today, Kent Douglas Henry, and we're talking about Alcoholics Anonymous and other types of areas. Now, we had mentioned a bit about, you were talking about alcohol and what it was chemically, and I was wondering if you could expound a little bit upon that.
Well, it's very interesting. Scientists categorize alcohol as a psychoactive drug, and let me just read this here, this paragraph, a portion of this paragraph, so listeners can understand what a psychoactive drug is. A psychoactive drug, psychopharmaceutical, or psychotropic substance is a chemical substance that acts primarily upon the central nervous system, where it alters brain function, resulting in changes in perception, mood, consciousness, and behavior. Now, think about that. Now, alcohol, or specifically ethanol, which is one of the chemicals found in alcohol that we drink, is categorized as one of those drugs. And it is in the same category as heroin, it's in the same category as cocaine, meth, and believe it or not, even nicotine. All of these are psychoactive drugs. I found that, this is research that I've done since I've been clean, and I even took I went online and got some pictures of the molecules. And if you look at the ethanol molecules and the cocaine molecules and the heroin and the poppy molecules and all these, they are incredibly similar. Just looking at them, they look incredibly similar, and I found that very interesting as well.
Yeah. Well, you know, I once again, for the listeners of the program, I would highly encourage you to help your friends and your family by getting them to look at this big book, because from everything I've been able to determine, going to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings is pretty much a trap that is going to end up doing much more harm than it does good. And as I said, there's a very high suicide rate amongst Alcoholics Anonymous. And the reason I believe that is because you have people that are trying with all of their heart to get over something, and they believe that this tool will do it, but they're not being given the correct information. So definitely get the big book. Now, I know that the big book can be downloaded online. If you go to Google and you just do a search on Alcoholics Anonymous big book. Now, I believe that there are people in key positions, especially, you know, religious and, you know, some of these rehab positions, that themselves are still trapped on this drug.
Absolutely.
Now, have you had any experience along these lines?
Yes, I went to a rehab, and you're going to find this is not a isolated circumstance. You're going to find that there are people in quote unquote recovery who are running programs who themselves are using. I've heard of programs where I know in the one that I was in, it was long term, and they wouldn't allow you to have any narcotics or whatever, or at least it was very controlled. And if I could kind of on a side note, and please Keith, you know how I am, so bring me back when when it's time. On a side note, I had some work done on my teeth, and this was very interesting because this was right during the time when we were going through these meetings. So on top of being in these meetings for 12 hours a day, I was in excruciating pain because I refused to take these narcotics, which really led me right back to where I had been from several years ago. But anyway, you will find that a lot of these directors and leaders and even people who are in these meetings are they're using the drugs, and they're sitting there telling you, if you do what I'm doing, you won't use, and they're using themselves. And I often hear you talk about your experiences in the church, and I've had similar experience in the church. Here are these people telling you, do this, and you won't sin, and you pull the covers off, and they're neck deep in it. You know what I mean? Yeah. So you have a similar thing here. Here you have a literal blueprint, if you will, of how you can be healed. And though people are calling themselves by that name, they are not using the principles contained in it. Well, I find that amazing.
I find it amazing too, and I think it's a hidden tragedy that people don't even know is going on out there. And I think that a lot of people think that people can't get healed because they really don't want to, and I think these people are struggling, and they're wrenching within themselves because they want to be healed and they just can't get free of it. And the reason they can't is just like anything else. If you're a scientist, I look at the information in the big book in some ways as a formula, a very accurate formula that is going to work. I mean, if you take 2 atoms of hydrogen and connect it with an atom of oxygen, you're going to get water. There's never going to be a time when you combine that and you get a rock. You're always going to get the result. And reading through that stuff, the things, when I say that stuff, I mean the big book, the things that impressed me were, number one, the absolute simplicity of it.
It is very simple. And you just mentioned something, you talked about people, wanting to be healed. And, then there are another category, and they say, well, there's people who don't want to be healed. But one of the things that you experienced when you read that book, which is one of the things that is talked about, not as much in the rooms anymore today, but is a moment of clarity. When you read that thing, you just have some clarity, and you start to see. A person who may not want to stop using is not operating in clarity because their lives are miserable. They're miserable. Everything around them is falling, but they want to keep in this thing. That's not sane. And the reason why they're keeping in it is because literally they are still insane. In fact, in the text, in the first 71 pages of the Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book, it talks about an insanity. It talks about being returned to sanity. And one of the definitions that's used for insanity is continuing on doing the same things and expecting a different result every time. And I can speak to you where the drugs are concerned. I can speak to you on that because without exception, every time when I went to use it, and my drug of choice was not only alcohol, it was cocaine, specifically crack. And every time I went to use, I told myself, I'm going to have fun. I'm going to get this drug, and I'm going to go, and I'm going to have fun. And from the first toke or whatever you want to call it, from the first hit, it wasn't fun. And every single time after I lived a nightmare, which every day it was, every time I used it turned into a nightmare, I would say to myself that next time before I use, I'm going to go have fun. And one of the premises in the big book, I believe it was in the doctor's opinion, which is one of the sections of the first 71 pages. It may have been, but it may not be. But it was talking about how one of the things that affects a true addict, and that's what I'm calling it, alcoholic is really not appropriate, I'd say addict, is that for some reason, a person in the midst of an addiction, I should say, is unable to recall with sufficient force to keep him from going out again the misery he experienced that day before, week before, or whatever. He is unable to recall in his brain how bad it was, even though it's clear, even though, in my case, I'm sitting in a room with nothing to eat but kidney beans, because I've gone to the food bank, and any dime I get, I try to add to get drugs, so I have nothing to eat, yet here the doorbell rings or the phone rings, and all of a sudden I forget all of that. I forget the state I'm in. I forget the literal hell, and when I say hell, I mean a feeling of separation from God and everything, and just this desperate feeling of loneliness that comes along with this thing. That next few hours, I forgot all of that. That is, and what we're talking about here is something spiritual going on. Because, I've told people that I've never had an urge to use. And I don't want them to mistake that for that thought not coming into my brain. Because you know how the spirit world is. That thought would come, but the very next thought will come was, hey, remember what happened last time? Remember where you were 7 years ago? Right. And that's all that took.
Right.
There was no conversation. Thank you very much. No, thank you. See you later. So, there is really what the big book refers to. I can't think of the word, but it's a threefold thing. It's a psychological, it's a four-part, psychological, a spiritual, a mental, which I guess is also physical, and a physical process going on. And it's also, the healing is parallel to that. They're talking about a physical, psychological, spiritual, and mental healing in one swoop. That's what the big book is talking about, a healing, which is, again, you can listen to anyone who's in the room, then, once my name is so-and-so, and I'm an alcoholic. And it seems like such a simple thing, but if I'm walking around saying my name is Kent and I'm an idiot, there's probably little chance that I'll ever think of myself as anything more than an idiot.
Right. Well, that makes a lot of sense. You're listening to the Progressions of Consciousness radio program on the Community Listening Network. I'm your host, Keith David Henry, and we're speaking with Kent Douglas Henry, who is a counselor, mentor, and is president of a non-profit organization that provides housing and mentoring for people that are coming out of long-term drug and alcohol rehab programs. When I first started looking at this, and I know I sound like a broken record here, but my heart still breaks for people that are really, really trying to kick this habit and have turned to groups like Alcoholics Anonymous only to find themselves deeper into something that's even a worse nightmare than the addiction itself. And this is something that's supposed to be helping them. So once again, the best gift you could give to someone is the Alcohol Anonymous Big Book and have them read the first 71 pages.
Well, I would say even more than that, and perhaps you can have some link on your site for people who are interested, but it's more than just reading that big book.
Okay.
What has to happen is, I mean, that will help. That will really help if you read it with an open mind, but what really has to happen is someone has to do what was done for me and for the men that were in that room. And someone has to take that big book and really break that down. And, excuse me, at this point, I would be willing for any of your listeners who was interested, and we could go to the link on the internet and we can go through it. But there were things that were just really underlined and circled and highlighted to really draw your attention to what was actually being said here. Because it's easy, I mean, as I said, there were 12 men in that room during that week. And the following week, we had a similar meeting with those 12 men to go over a book called The 12 by 12, which is a kind of parallel of the principles in the Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book, specifically breaking down the 12 steps. And I found myself, as we were discussing, you know, the different steps, I found myself asking, I mean, not out loud to myself, were these men in the room with me? Were they hearing the same? Because the things they're saying are not what this man was saying. And I was inspecting the big books of the others who were in the room, where there were specific things we were to underline and specific things we were to circle and specific things we were to highlight. And they had things that should have been underlined were circled, and things that were supposed to be highlighted were underlined, and some things were left out altogether. And I was like, what? I'm like, wait a minute. And I mean, if you can imagine, you're only talking about 71 pages, and we took a week of 10 to 12 hours a day. So you can imagine how specifically and how intricately we went over that. And I can, as I'm sitting here now, I can remember specific times him saying, no, underline that. Like 15 times. No, that gets underlined. Oh, you mean, no, that gets underlined. And they still came out with the thing circled or highlighted or not underlined at all. And I'm like,
that's just too funny. Here's what I would like to say, if you don't mind. If someone wanted to send you an email and just maybe ask you some questions about where to start or how to get help along these lines, do you have an email address where they could reach you?
Yeah, they can actually send it to my email.
Okay.
Which would be kent.henry@att.net.
Kent.henry@att.net.
And believe me, I understand that there may be a lot of people, I mean, you know, but that is, as I looked in the Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book, it was really interesting because this one gentleman, Bill W., who was one of the writers, talked about how he basically found a new purpose in life, and how this is no longer about staying clean. It's about a new outlook in life. And I believe you and others have found that. It's not about staying clean, or it's not about any of that. The Big Book doesn't focus on staying clean. The Big Book focuses on a new way of life.
Absolutely.
A new way of thinking, a new thought pattern. The scriptures talk about being transformed by a renewing of your mind. That's what the Big Book is talking about. And it is my responsibility, I don't even say responsibility, it's my privilege to give this information and to be doing what I'm doing with my life right now is a privilege. I tell you, sometimes it's hard. I mean, sometimes my brain is fried. Sometimes I'm really tired. But in all of that, this is the most rewarding period of my life. And I've accomplished a lot of things in my life, but none of those, and in fact, all of those have run dry and have come to a wall. This thing is just so unbelievably fulfilling to bring freedom to people.
Absolutely.
And as many people as want to email, I'd be happy to, get these people walk through what I was walked through, and perhaps they could even get involved and get in on this kind of underground movements to get the meetings back to what they're supposed to be.
Now, what would you say to someone that wants to be effective and wants to be helped? I mean, a person with this kind of information that walks into a modern AA meeting might be tarred and feathered. And
that's the last thing you want to do.
Kicked out.
That's the last thing you want to do, is walk into an AA meeting and start trying to present some of this information for a couple reasons. Number one, I'm not going to go into a Muslim church and stand up and say, all you are going to hell because you're not believing in Jesus. That's insane. I would never do something like that. What I would do is put myself out there for someone who is looking for the truth and say, here, I have the way. This is what the book says. This is what the textbook says. And it has worked for me. That's what I will do. And that's what this whole meeting was about. This whole meeting was about getting to a point where things are back how they were when there was a 50 to 100% success rate. This man, as I started to say before, this man, Bill W., to the dismay of his wife, was bringing people who were in the program into his home and allowing them to sleep in his house. And, he told his wife, he's like, look, this is who I am. This is what I do. I don't know what to tell you, sweetie. As compared to what my life was and the hell you were going through with me with this thing, this is nothing, and, of course, it was a different time. Of course, you have to use your instincts and be reasonable with it. But, essentially what this group has done is something similar to what Bill W. has done. If you see this, if you walk into this house, first of all, there's no way you're going to think it is what it is. It looks like, it's beautifully furnished. These men, they pay a small amount, and really, as we talked about it when we first started out, I didn't want to charge anything. But part of what the rest of the board was saying was we have to give the men a sense of accomplishment, and they have to be contributing to this thing or it won't work. So, they pay a very small amount, and they get a room in the house. They get unlimited use of the house. There's a washer and dryer in the house. There's a cable TV. There's internet. There's a telephone. They get all of that. It allows them to save money and move along the way and be empowered themselves. What you see now is an industry that is making money off of the hell that these people are going through. A 28-day rehab will do nothing for you except make the people who you're going into the rehab $300 a day per person. And that's a minimum fee that people are paying for these rehabs. Of course, insurance is taking a large portion of that.
Right.
But there was one facility that I went to. It was a 27-day facility, and from there I went to this long-term facility. But this particular facility that I had gone to had a alumni group, or an alumni, I should say. And these alumni people were very spiritual. They were very much into the spiritual aspect of what was going on here. And at a point, this particular facility fired all of them and went totally and 100% clinical, which is crazy because this is not a clinical issue.
Right.
It is a spiritual, psychological, physical, mental and social issue.
Now that's a good segue, because we have maybe 6 or 7 minutes, and I really want to get to this point. And I know it's kind of unfair to ask you to speak on it with such a short amount of time. But as I was reading the big book, one of the things that the author was saying was, you may feel the need to get help from a family or a friend, but they may not understand. You need to approach God alone.
Right.
Can you speak on that?
I can speak on it. It's kind of difficult because that's a very abstract concept. But what I found was the same thing I'm doing now. What I found in life is God just told me what's true. I can't go by your experiences. Your experience might help me, but I have to have my own experience, and I have to see that God is doing this. Because if I'm relying on a quote-unquote group consciousness, or if I'm relying on my sponsor, or if I'm relying on my dedication to meetings, or if I'm relying on the service that I do, then that's not me and God. That's me and my God and God. Because now my God is the rooms. Now my God is meetings. Now my God is the group consciousness. What I think the big book is saying here, and what I think, if I may, God is saying here is, it's you and me. Forget Joe, Bill, and Sally. It's you and me. Let's talk.
Come, let us reason together.
Come, let us reason together. And that's what I found. And as a result, you have, and it's such an interesting dynamic, because the three main characters in our organization are all recovered addicts, but we have our way of looking at things are so different. They are so different, but the bottom line is that we all understand that it's God. And that's the one thing that we can all come together and agree on, is that it is God. You find your own way, and all three of us appeal to a total different group of people. And I mean, and isn't that really what it's about? Isn't it about my individualism being able to, or the group as having individuals being able to appeal to a larger base than one group having one opinion?
Right.
What kind of base are you going to appeal to? If I have three different people who are successful from the same basis, but I can talk to this guy where he'll look at you and say, "What are you talking about?" That's what this thing is about. I don't know if that answered the question.
It did. It did. It answered it very well. I want to remind everyone that you're listening to the Progressions of Consciousness radio program on the Community Listening Network. I'm your host, Keith David Henry. For my listeners, I wanted to remind you about my website, www.don'treadthisbook.net. There's some very good information. You may want to take a look at the several of the books there that I have for sale, but even if you don't order the books, you'll be very much helped just by browsing through some of the sections in there. It'll be very helpful. And we do have a couple minutes left. I would like you once again to give us your information and your contact information.
Okay. Again, my name is Kent Henry. My email address is kent.henry@att.net. And if you take anything away from Keith's program, or even this program today, is, there is no mold. There is no mold. You have to find, there is one source, but there is no mold. You have to find your own way to that source. And if you seek it, believe me, that way is out there. And that's what we have found in this group. We have found the one source, but just several different ways to it. That's all.
Right, and that's something I've harped on over and over again, and it's so simple. I spent a lot of weeks, kind of developing this point, because I don't see a lot of people really doing it, and I see people, it seems like year after year they're going from this seminar to that seminar. They're getting readings every week, and searching for that spiritual experience or whatever, trying to find something that they're just frustrated and they don't even really know what they're looking for. And the reason is because you're looking for something that you already have. And it's amazing to me where you have, just the general public saying, oh, well, here's this Alcoholics Anonymous, why isn't it helping more people? And, the answer is because it's not Alcoholics Anonymous. It's some perversion of something that works that has been changed, and it just doesn't work anymore. It doesn't work in the form that it's being laid out. Once again, this is Keith David Henry. You're listening to the Progressions of Consciousness radio program on the Community Listening Network. And remind everyone that things are not what they seem. Things are seldom what they appear to be. I'll see you next week.